Okay, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. Just so the first thing to note today is that closed captions are available. So if you do need that facility, please click on the CC box at the bottom of your screen. Welcome to today's program. My name is Dr. Miriam Nihan-Gray, and this is our second installment in the programs of Black, Brown and Green Voices for Fall 2023. I'm really honored to be with you today to share in a conversation with someone who is an iconic commentator on the American experience, Dennis Lehane. And today, as you know, the topic of our program is this wonderful, wonderful book, Small Mercies. So difficult to put down when you start reading, and looking forward to asking some questions around that in a moment. By dint of circumstance, I suppose Dennis is tuning into us from California. I'm actually not far from where his father grew up in Cork. I'm 25 miles from Clonakilty, where Dennis's father grew up. And Kim is in on the East Coast with us today, my colleague Kim DaCosta. I'll just run through a few housekeeping matters before I hand over to my NYU and African American Irish Diaspora colleague in Kim to introduce Dennis more formally. And I just want to make a note that I feel slightly outnumbered here today with these two Bostonians, and I hope that I'll be able to hold my own with the two of them in this conversation. It's really, really great to have Kim on with us today, because she's very familiar with the Boston so well described in Dennis's work. We are recording today's event, and it will be published on the Glucksman Ireland House NYU YouTube channel later. We'll share the link with you later if you want to watch it back or to share it with others. We'll try to keep the program within about an hour to 65 minutes or so. For the first 35-40 minutes, I'll chat with Dennis, with Kim, and then we will open up to some audience questions. Our chat function, I believe, is working, so please feel free to place some questions in the chat. Just want to thank the teams at NYU's Glucksman Ireland House and African American Irish Diaspora Network for their support in mounting this program again. I'd also like to thank our promotional partners at NYU's John Brademas Center, especially Tom McIntyre and Polly Terzian, NYU's Office for Global Inclusion, and especially Autumn Rain and Tara Nakata, and at New York Public Library Schomburg Center for Research and Black Culture, Sonia Richards, Joy Bivens, and Lisa Herndon. Now let me hand over to my friend and colleague, Professor Kim DaCosta, to formally introduce today's speaker. Over to you, Kim.
Thank you, Miriam. Well, Dennis Lehane, who grew up in Boston, is perhaps well known to many of you. Since his first novel, A Drink Before the War, won the Shamus Award, he's published 13 more novels that have been translated into more than 30 languages and become international bestsellers. Darkness, Take My Hand, Sacred, Gone Baby Gone, Prayers for Rain, Mystic River, Shutter Island, The Given Day, Moonlight Mile, Live by Night, World Gone By, Since We Fell, and now Small Mercies. 4 of his novels have been adapted into films. A fifth, The Drop, was adapted by Lehane himself into a film starring Tom Hardy, Noomi Rapace, and James Gandolfini in his final role. Lehane was a staff writer on the acclaimed HBO series The Wire, and also worked as a writer-producer on HBO's Boardwalk Empire and the Netflix series Bloodline. He was a writer-producer on the television adaptations of 3 Stephen King novels, Mr. Mercedes and End of Watch for DirecTV and The Outsider for HBO. He wrote and produced the acclaimed limited series Blackbird for Apple TV Plus, and is currently developing the next series for Apple, which I can't wait to see. Lehane and his family live in California.
Thank you, Kim, for that lovely introduction. And welcome again, Dennis. Sorry for all those words before we get to you. We're anxious to speak to you. I don't want to be too gushing. The Irish aren't great with this, but I can't commend this as a read. If anyone's on here and hasn't read it yet, please go out and buy a copy of this book. It's so well crafted and written, and just so it brings you right into the narrative from the very opening page in such a powerful way. And for those of you who haven't read the book yet, perhaps, I suppose this, from what I can gather, Dennis, the topic of Small Mercies results from a trauma from your childhood in terms of a memory. Would you mind just setting out the stall a little bit in terms of, or sorry, not to overstate it as a trauma, but an event that you had clearly
Yes,
embedded
thank
in your memory,
Yeah.
that was something that lived with you into adulthood. Can I use that as the jumping off point to where
Sure.
Small
Yeah.
Mercies came from?
Yeah. So when Boston decided to desegregate the public schools, which had been 10 years coming, 10 years in the making, 10 years thwarted, justice denied. They finally did it by court order 90 days before the first day of school. And they said that the way that they were going to do it was that they were going to bus students from exclusively white South Boston High School to predominantly black Roxbury High School, and vice versa. They were going to swap 50% of the school populations. These were both extremely poor schools in extremely poor neighborhoods. And what was expected to be a little bumpy turned into an explosion. And the summer of 1974 became just bewildering in its violence, both physical and written and shouted. And ultimately, there were people throwing rocks at busloads of school children as they came into South Boston to go to school. So around that time, I don't know exactly when, I can't speak to it because it's been lost to memory. Somewhere between late 74 and early 1975, I lived in Dorchester, right in the first neighborhood south of South Boston. So we shared a border with South Boston. And my father was coming home, and usually we came over the Broadway Bridge and we took a right. And for whatever reason, I don't know if it was blocked off, I don't know what happened. He was forced to drive into the middle of a protest that was going on Broadway, which is the main drag in South Boston. And we were buffeted for 10 blocks down to this screaming crowd, this mob, and they were burning people in effigy. They were burning effigies of Judge Garrity, Arthur Garrity, of Ted Kennedy, of William Taylor, who ran the Boston Globe. I didn't know any of these people at the time. I just knew, holy God, there's just these burning things hanging from poles, and they were screaming. And some of the things they were screaming were not racist, and some of the things they were screaming were racist. And I was never so terrified in my life, even though they didn't do anything to us. We were the right look. And my father drove a Chevy, and looked like a working class man, and so we were okay. But we floated down through this sea in this Chevy with these burning effigies hanging over us. It was very medieval, and I never forgot it. I never forgot it. I've been trying to process it ever since. And when I wrote Small Mercies, I found this very interesting. I couldn't write prose for 3 years leading up to Small Mercies. I kept trying and I kept failing. And I could write screenplays left and right. But when I tried prose, it just stuck, and it just stuck, and it just stuck. And then I went to New Orleans to make Blackbird. And we had everything go wrong. I mean, everything that could go wrong went wrong. We had lightning strikes that blew up our sets. We had hurricanes. We had COVID outbreaks. We had personality clashes. We had ungodly heat. And in the midst of all of this, I started writing Small Mercies, and it just flowed out. So there I was working 80 hours a week on a TV show. And suddenly I just started to write prose again. And it flowed. I mean, Small Mercies came out in 6 months. Just flowed out. And I think it made me think of when I was a child, I became a writer because I couldn't process the world in front of me. That's why people become writers. They try to make sense of the chaos. And so here I was dealing with insanely stressful situations, trying to keep a lid on a multi-million-dollar production, not lose my cool, make everybody feel like I'm the leader. And the stress of that I had to escape from. So where did I escape? I escaped by writing a novel in 1974. It was madness.
And may I ask you, Dennis, if you don't mind, and I don't want to push you too much in terms of, you know, what's comfortable in terms of your family history and whatnot,
Yeah, sure.
but your father wasn't part, your parents weren't in the protest. You weren't part
Nope.
of these
Nope.
people, from what I can gather. You knew you knew some of these people who
Yeah.
were on the streets. Have you thought about why and what marked your family out and your parents out, that you weren't part of the people in your community who were there? You know what I mean, in terms of...
Sure. Well, there was a couple of things. We weren't threatened directly. So I'll give you one place in which South Boston was left holding the bag, reputation-wise. They were ground zero. If this had happened in Charlestown, same result. If this had happened in parts of Dorchester, same result. This had happened in Hyde Park, Roslindale, same result. But Southie was first. And because Southie was first, and maybe because they were certainly 100% white. I mean, South Boston was 100% white in 1974. You did not go in there if you weren't white. So it's possible that there was I don't think it's fair to brand South Boston 100% as, oh, they were just racist. You know what I mean? The whole city was racist. The entire city was racist. So South Boston was just first. However, my parents, ultimately, 2 of my brothers were bused. My parents weren't running out on the streets protesting. They weren't happy about it. My father saw it as clearly as a case in which the powers that be made another decision affecting the poor neighborhoods, the working class neighborhoods that we had no vote in. And he was very clear about that, because he remembered when you could see the sea from our neighborhood, you could see the ocean. And then they dropped in 93 without any boats, without anything. And they just plowed out by eminent domain swaths of our neighborhood to put in the expressway. So my father was very indignant. And I knew a lot of people who were righteously indignant about this, because the architects behind it made damn sure it didn't affect them. This did not happen in Wellesley. This did not happen and they did this by court order. They filed lawsuits to keep this from coming into their neighborhoods. So it was very much a NIMBY issue. And NIMBY is racism. Not in my backyard is racism. So whether you're a white liberal or you're a whatever you are, if you're saying not in my backyard, you're a racist, in my opinion. I don't care how you vote. I don't care how progressive you think you are. You're racist. So my father would say at the dinner table all the time, it doesn't matter if a person is black, green, white, or yellow. You know, that was his, or purple. Purple was his big one. Purple. I'd say purple. And we'd be like, what purple people exist at? And now, did he walk this as much as he talked it all the time? No, he was a creature of his time, without a doubt. And I'll tell you one thing about immigrants, and I've seen this across the board with my immigrant friends, with my immigrant family. They're always pointing at other immigrants. I mean, they're always pointing at other races. It's the first thing they do. I mean, I used to work with a bunch of Ethiopian guys, and they would all be like, oh, if there's one thing we can't stand, it's Haitians. You know what I mean? Like, what? You know, there was just always something. And you go to Europe and you see this very much. You see people say, oh, the French. You know, I mean, you could walk into any pub in Ireland today, hang out for 10 minutes, and you're going to hear something about the British, the French, the Poles, the Italians, something. It's very European. And my parents were, very capable of that. And I knew a lot of people who were very capable. In fact, everybody I knew spoke that way. But when they spoke about blacks, there was a different tone. It was simply a different tone. It wasn't a little bit of a soft eye roll. It was fear. And so my parents, again, did not embody that, but there were people in my household who did. And there was tons of people I knew. I mean, this whole resurgence, it's not resurgence in racism that we see right now, where people are saying the quiet part out loud, where, you know, we've seen the dark edges of Trumpism in America, you know, is very racism based. And this is not a surprise remotely to me. I'm like, where have you people been? What kitchens are you hanging out in? Because I know people who use these words to this day, as long as the door is closed, as long as no one's looking around.
So when you're speaking about, those early days and your response to that, being in the car and
Yeah.
yeah, it brings me right back. Now, I wasn't in South Boston in those years. I was a few towns south in a newly developing suburb where the people who were populating it were coming out of South Boston or Roslindale or the city. My mother's an Irish American, my father's a Black American. And in those days, that was extremely uncommon, but particularly charged in Boston.
Yeah.
And my mother, as you said, South Boston was 100% white, and she wouldn't take us there. And so my experience of the busing thing was absolutely one of fear, but it came through the news. It came through the Globe. It came through Chat and Nat or whatever, and the sense of, I think at that time as a kid, you personalize it because here is my people in both modes, like literally fighting each other in the street. And yet what you say is, even at a remove from, being impacted directly by busing in the suburbs, the same kind of talk with my mostly white peers.
Because they were part of white flight. They were part of white flight. They got the hell out. They were like, well, we're not dealing with this,
Yeah, but they get out, but they bring the attitude.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I find that the most despairing thing about what I see happen, what has been happening in this country for years and years and years, is that the idea was supposed to be that you would, by getting more successful, become a better person, become a more enlightened person, that the children would become better. And I just remember I had this neighbor in Brighton, first house I ever bought. I had this neighbor beside me who was kind of casually, not in a really bad way, but he was of his time. He was a Vietnam War veteran. He had been a tea cop. He was casually misogynist. He was casually racist, but it wasn't like a big deal. But it was also very much of him. Like, I was like, this guy gets a little bit of a pass from me because he's part of a time. And when you grew up, everybody spoke this way. And when he grew up, everybody, so I'm not looking for this guy to get woke. And he was not a bad guy under any circumstances. It was just there. It was casual. It was just there. His son repulsed me. His son had none of the excuses. His son did not grow up that way. His son did not have a limited education. His son did not get shipped off to Vietnam to fight when he was 19 years old. You know what I mean? His son got no passes from me. And I was like, that's the problem. The problem is, I don't know if you remember Larry McMurtry's HUD. HUD is the product of the father, the tough oil man. The tough oil man had to be the tough oil man. The son is just a bad seed. And I worry that we're a nation of HUDs. We have all the hate and none of the pressures and stressors that should have caused that hate. We just took it.
Dennis, on that topic of hate, and in preparing for this interview and picking up some interviews you've done in the past about Small Mercies, and Mary Pat Fennessy, as the hatred in her and how it's passed down. Can you talk a little bit, about developing her as a character, or I suppose talk a little bit about her and that depressing kind of intergenerational instead of passing empathy and love, not to sound all kumbaya, but like that this, what was it, this grenade of hatred that was passed down. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Well, when I grew up, I knew several Mary Pats, and they were project moms. Some were singles, some moms, some were not. And they were tough as nails. I mean, I would sooner pick a fight with an army than pick a fight with one of these women, you know. And they were brawlers. They'd fight just as well as a man. They wouldn't win, but they'd make him wish he hadn't picked the fight. And they produced really tough kids, kids you would definitely not fight, you know, talk about generational. And it was only as I got older that I could understand that they were actually sad. They weren't anything to look at with any type of envy. They were products of abuse from their family homes, abuse from just poverty. Poverty isn't a form of abuse, societal abuse. They were abused by their husbands. You know, they were ultimately then turned that onto their children and sent the kids out into the world with it. And I wanted Mary Pat to go on a journey. At the very beginning of the book, her husband has left her. It happens before the book begins. And at one point she says the reason was because he said her hate embarrasses him. She didn't understand it. She just doesn't understand it. She didn't get it. By the end of the book, she gets it. That's the point. That's the journey she has to go on. She has to understand how she has internalized and embodied hatred. And she's passed it on unwittingly, in many cases, to her children. So there's two journeys in the book. That's the one that she goes on that is not heroic at all. Mary Pat is not a hero. You know, Mary Pat is an anti-hero. She's somebody, just because she has a bit of enlightenment, I didn't want to be like kumbaya and applauding her, you know, but she has other qualities that make her very heroic. And one is she's fiercely loyal, and she loves her children, and there's no quit in her. You can't scare her. You can't talk her out of this. She's the friggin' Terminator by a certain point in this book. And that journey is heroic. That journey is, I have discovered that every belief I have is a lie, that this culture that I thought loved me actually is just a wall. And they have done something to my child, and I will not stop until I've knocked that wall down. Hell or high water, whoever gets in my way. And I found that very wonderful to write, because you know, I'm a nice progressive Democrat, blah 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 blah, liberal, you know, but I am biblical when it comes to how people should be treated if they hurt a member of my family, if they hurt anybody I love. I make no excuses for it. I don't care. I mean, you shouldn't, you know, just because there's an old line, it shows up in one of my books. I used to hear it in my neighborhood all the time, and I believe it's my core. If you start the fight, don't you dare complain about how I finish it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's Mary Pat. You started this. So,
you know, it's so funny because as you describe Mary Pat, you're getting at some of what I was feeling while reading her, because I mean, I've known Mary Pats, but I haven't known Mary Pats, in the sense that you get this sense where there's still this divide. And I guess I was relating her relationship to Augie's mother.
yeah.
They're work friends. They actually seem on some level to understand each other. And on some level, I felt like, yeah, I understand Mary Pat, but we could never be friends. Because of what I know about the way that she thinks with respect to race, not loyalty, not her kids,
Nope.
not, and I totally love the insights she has about we're just pawns in much of this.
Right. But all of that still does not excuse her basic racism. I mean, that's the key, you know? And that's what she gets when she has that moment, which I feel in another type of writer's hands, you know, where she finally understands what she has done, and she tries to make amends to the African American family, and they wholly reject her. And I was like, you're damn right. You're a little late to the party. I mean, if she had another 10 years of evolution, maybe she could have that conversation. But I'm so tired of seeing films and reading books in which the white person is congratulated for realism. Racism's bad. Yeah, no shit. You know, where you been?
Yeah. You know, I thought it was going to go in that direction, and then it didn't.
Yeah, and it doesn't. Yeah,
but to your earlier point about, you know, the second generation having no excuse, you know, when they didn't grow up with a particular era in which certain things were just taken for granted as the way race worked. Mary Pat's ex-husband does evolve, or maybe he never fully held these views. And I'm curious about how you developed that. I loved those scenes in the book because they were really nuanced about the race, gender, sexuality, feelings that come up around interracial intimacy. And I thought you did that so well. But I guess my question would be, like, who is that character for you? How did he get to where he is?
We're at a bar back in my neighborhood, probably 15 years ago. Maybe even 20. It was 15. It was 15. And this was a very famous site. As we know, the whole mob lore connected to this bar. We know the owner was slaughtered by Whitey Bulger at one point. I mean, this is a very central bar in our neighborhood. And all the people I knew from growing up showed up. It was just this crazy thing. And everybody just kept piling in. And it was just my whole cohort was in there. We had a great night. And we were leaving, and I was with my oldest friend in the world, female friend in the world. She and I had grown up literally in the same house. She grew up on the second floor of my house. And we came out, and everybody was going to score drugs at the same place. And everybody was going to after parties at the same place. Nothing had changed. Literally nothing had changed. And many of them, I'm not saying all of them, but many of them had the same racist attitudes. Many didn't. This isn't, you can't paint everybody with one brush. But they were all doing exactly what they had been doing when I last saw them. Mm-hmm. And my friend said to me, why did we get out? Why are we different? I mean, what? And we couldn't understand it. We couldn't grasp it. I don't have an answer for you, is what I'm saying. The only thing I can go back to is that while I heard the N-word all around me growing up, I heard it within my own household on a very regular basis. I never heard it from my parents. And I looked up to my father. My father was my model for manhood. We did not have necessarily, we had an old traditional relationship. It wasn't like he was my buddy, you know, but he defined for me my work ethic I got from my old man, my compassion for other people I got from my old man, my sense that you should always be of use I got from my old man. And I think I got that attitude. And again, I saw behind the veil sometimes, and I saw that he wasn't as enlightened as I would want him to be. But man, did he embody it within the home? And did he teach me? Didn't rub off on some of the other members of the family, but it rubbed off on me, and it rubbed off on one of my brothers. And we were like, you know, my father didn't think it was cool, and it wasn't, you know, wasn't cool to me. So I think that's a I gotta give credit to both my father and my mother on that. I never heard them say that word in my life. And then I would go over friends' houses and they'd have 50 words for it.
Yeah.
You know, there's a moment in the book where Mary Pat recalls all the words she knows. And that was the one argument that my editor won, because I did it as an homage to Do the Right Thing, which is one of my favorite movies. And there's a great scene where everybody calls each other all the names that they know for each of the races. And I did that with Mary Pat. And my editor said, pull it. it's too much. It's just too much. And I said, fair enough, you know, but it was every word that I knew. And I think there were 15.
Oh my
I
God,
mean,
you should.
15 different words, you know?
Yeah.
So
Dennis, how do you reconcile, in light of our conversation and, you know, some of the aspects that are so vividly described in Small Mercies, how do you self-identify as being Irish American, and how do you reconcile all that with the introspection and critique of aspects of what you came from in terms of Irish America, you know, as a cultural background? Do you know what I mean? Has it in any way diluted your sensibility of feeling Irish American, or how the group, like, you know, have you thought about how Irish America
I think I know what you're talking about. My father called it wearing of the green, and he was very contemptuous of it. So I consider myself a little bit closer to the Irish side than the American side, probably because I didn't even know people spoke without brogues until I went to school. Like I just had never heard it. You have to understand that they transported Ireland. My father was from a family of 18. My mother was from a family of 14. They came over here and they just stayed together. It was like that line in Goodfellas. We didn't know anybody else. We didn't know anybody else. So you'd go to each other's houses and they'd all be speaking with their brogues, and they'd all be, oh yeah, just remember the old times, no, you know, and then be that. And so I felt very connected to that. And they were so contemptuous of putting on the green, which is what they would call St. Patrick's Day. You know, oh, you're Irish once a year. Or if you ever talked about supporting the IRA, my father would lose his mind, because he was like, that's not who we are. You know, and he wanted 26 and 6 together, but he was like, that's just terrorism, period. That's it. Don't you come here, be third generation Irish, and talk about sending money back to the IRA like you understand this country. You don't understand shit. So another thing I got from my old man was, you know, so I think I always just identified with Ireland. And Ireland to me it's about music, and it's about literature. It's about James Joyce. It's about Yeats. It's about laughter. It's about being very funny, because life is, you know, because you're kind of the punchline of God's joke. I mean, I do believe that's the core of Irish humor. And I just felt it was everything that I see modern Ireland is right now. Again, I'm coming from the outside looking in, and I've heard that it is obvious. I'm writing a script set in Dublin right now, based on a Dublin-based book about Ireland after the crash of the Celtic Tiger. So I get that it's not this hunky-dory happy world, but I also see what their front-facing socio-political face right now is a beacon to the rest of the world, in my opinion. You know, it's what we should be. And that's how I always felt about. I just felt much more. I just didn't feel connected to the let's put on a shamrock and go beat somebody up kind of Irish America. You know, I was never connected to that.
Yeah, I always say, you know, until I went to school, and even after that, you know, shortly after, I didn't know white people didn't come in anything other than Irish.
I know, it's shocking, right? And then you're like, what? Yeah.
But I was going to ask you about that connection to Ireland in the 70s. You know, there's that memorable interview that Bernadette Devlin did with Channel 5 when she was touring the US to generate support for her activism in Northern Ireland. And it strikes me, it's such a compelling interview, because she's reflecting on the shock that she has at Irish Americans' racism. And when she talks about it, she, you know, positions African Americans' freedom struggle as coming from the same sorts of oppressive forces as she, as a Catholic woman in Northern Ireland, is
Yeah.
facing.
Yeah.
And she makes common cause with African Americans while being kind of shocked, disappointed, saddened, and critical of Irish Americans at the time. And this is 1979. And so I was curious, you know, how your parents or you vis-a-vis that whole transatlantic connection to
Well,
politics in the 70s.
well, I think it's a very fascinating part of the diaspora, which is the Irish Americans. And I think this happens in every immigrant culture, to be honest with you. I just don't know. I can't speak with any authority about the other ones. I just suspicion. My parents came over. They connected. They were part of a daisy chain, right? So they got brought over, and their relatives are here, and their brother-in-law is over here, and their brother's here, and everybody gets together in the same general area. Everybody moved into Boston, right? So here they all are, and they get together every week, and all they talk about every week is the old country. They never talk about what's going on in the country. They rarely would take 10% of their conversation. Everything else was about, you remember the old days? That wouldn't happen in Ireland now. You know, there was this whole thing. And so we grew up believing that in Ireland, right now, in 1977, which is the first time I went over there, there's no divorce. There's no babies born out of wedlock. Ha 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 ha. There's, you know, it's this incredible theocracy in which everybody behaves morally at all times. We go back over there. I'm 12 years old, and we meet the kids born out of wedlock. We meet the people on their third divorce. We meet, and everybody's like, what's up with these? You know, the people who leave harden. They calcify, and they stay stuck back in that time period. The people who stay move on. Time moves on. And so I found that the most fascinating aspect of my family's culture. And so I wonder if part of the racism stems from the fact that people say, well, back in Ireland, you know, look, I was in Ireland in 1996. I went around the entire country. This is only 96. So before Ireland takes a victory lap on how awesome it is, in 1996, we traveled the entire country, came all the way back, myself and my girlfriend, whose parents were Irish. We came into Dublin. We were crossing we were crossing one of the bridges, and I said, "Oh, a black guy." The first one I'd seen in the country in 30 days. I'd been to Galway. I'd been to Clonakilty. I'd been to Donegal. I'd been to Sligo. Been all over. Hadn't seen a single black person in 30 days. That was Ireland in 96. So it's possible that people, I think, romanticize that, just as I know a lot of white men in America who have no connection to any ethnicity romanticize the 1950s.
Yeah.
You know, I even know somebody who calls it Paradise Lost. I'm like, yeah, for white dudes. For Don Draper, yes, you know. So
Dennis, I'll ask you this, and then I want to ask you something about writing, how you write and stuff. But I've seen in another interview that when you were writing Small Mercies, that there was kind of a rage in you in terms of like the process. Would you talk a little bit about that? I think it's very powerful and important.
I've always had this anger in me that never made any sense. It just never made sense. It didn't. I was loved. I was raised correctly. Can point to no moment in my past in which I was traumatized. I was assaulted. Nothing. And yet, people who know me very closely know that there's rage. There's this, you know, very hard to trigger, but once you trigger it, boy. It was writing Small Mercies that I finally understood it wasn't the rage. It's like most rage. It wasn't the rage of an adult. It was the rage of a child. And the rage was when I was 9 years old, my childhood ended. It did not end from any sort of personal trauma. It ended from a kind of a global trauma around me. I couldn't understand how all of these people who I knew, who I looked up to, who I respected, could get to the point where they would either be throwing rocks at buses with children in them, or they would be making excuses for people who didn't. What about isms? What about isms were huge in Boston in the mid-70s? Well, what about the blacks who go do this? And what about the, you're like, yeah, let's get back to the people throwing rocks at a bus with children in them. And to see KKK spray painted on walls in my neighborhood, to see kill all N-words, and to see people who you love, in some cases, truly love, say this is fine. They just need to stay the fuck out. I could never reconcile that. I just couldn't reconcile it. But you do it, and that, from that point on, from the time I was 9 till I left the house at 20, left the neighborhood at 20, I was like a spy behind enemy lines. I didn't understand any of this. I didn't get it. I didn't agree with any of it. But standing up there and saying something would have just been like, I would occasionally, and then I'd just get have a sense of humor, dude. Sit down. You know what I mean? And just be like, that would be the response. It just was, it was in so many ways a terrible way to live. And I feel like, without a doubt, and again, I tried to stop you from using trauma at the very beginning of this episode. I think trauma is thrown around way too much. It's a crap word. I don't think I was traumatized, but I do think my childhood ended at 9. I lost my innocence at 9 because of racism.
And so you were channeling that in New Orleans when you start writing the novel, then? Right.
It just came, and all of a sudden I'm writing this dark book. I'm like, literally, as I'm writing, I'm like, this is the darkest thing I ever wrote. Like, without a doubt, I'm like, this is pitch. And if Bobby hadn't come into the book, thank God Bobby came into the book, because he wasn't planned. It was getting too dark. But as I was writing, I was like, this is so enjoyable. I was in a great mood writing this book. And I think it was because I was just expelling all this rage. I was finally talking to my inner child and saying, it's okay. It's all right. You weren't wrong.
It's really amazing to hear you say that, because you're in many ways describing what I would say is true for myself. But as a biracial girl in that time and place, you're obviously sort of implicated in it, in your surroundings, in other words.
Yeah.
Especially there's 6 of my siblings, and depending on context, you might not know we're Black. So you become, like, as you said, a spy. And you just don't know when people are just going to reveal what they usually keep hidden. And so it produces a profound sense of distrust. That, in many ways, childhood ended. And 74 is that moment where, because it was so present in the culture, the Band-Aid gets pulled off, or the curtain gets pulled away, in these moments of where people reveal something, and I've never forgotten it.
And I think if you
love, and the people you thought were friends, or
that's it. That's the weirdest thing. Like, how do you reconcile the fact that somebody you love embodies what you hate? How do you deal with that? How and I had to live with that. So many of I'm talking, one of the closest people in my life was a racist, like just defined himself by it. And he was somebody I just absolutely adored. We were super close. And how do so I had to move that piece over here, but how do you do that? You don't do it clean, is what I'm saying. And you're constantly processing it. And if I had decided to reject every racist person I knew from the time I was 9 to the time I was 20, I would have had no friends. I would have had nobody in my life. I would have been sitting in my, I might have had one friend over here and my parents, and one of my brothers. But I mean, it's a very, it's a massive mind F. And I did not know that, nor was I conscious of it at the time. That's where the rage came from. And it took me another 35 years to figure out the rage. Thank you, Mary Scott.
Yeah.
Can I, if you don't mind, Dennis, I have a great question here from Alana in our audience. Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I'm a Chinese Irish Bostonian whose Irish Catholic mother grew up in Southie. My grandfather pulled my mother from school because she was going to be bused into Roxbury, and it's a time that she never spoke about. Bostonians like to boast that it's liberal and tolerant of difference on the one hand, but then is intensely loyal, parochial, and closed off to whoever is an outsider, in parentheses, racist, ? Yeah. My question to you is, how do Bostonians reconcile this dichotomy? Do you think that the closed off nature of old school Boston has changed due to gentrification and is disappearing?
Well, I think, there's a couple of things here I do want to specify, which is the liberal ideals of Boston have consistently, when they have been pushed at, have revealed themselves to be far less liberal than they're saying. Again, it's easy to be liberal and progressive and for, say, busing when it doesn't affect you. It's very easy. It's very easy to sit in Wellesley and want busing. It's very hard to sit in South Boston, Rosendale, etc., and say, oh yeah, let's think about one thing about busing. I'll say the line I'll say about busing, which is busing is a debatable issue. Desegregation is not. Desegregation had to happen, and it had to happen right then. It had been delayed 9 years. So, but the method by which they chose to do it, that still is debatable. Because if you look at it, let's say wherever you live right now, and your child literally lives across the street from the school, which is why you moved there. And now you have to turn and put that kid on a bus, and that kid goes across the city. That adds an hour to your schedule on each side, and you don't have money. So, I mean, there's a lot of things about it that I feel like the neighborhoods got unfairly demonized for their reaction against busing. Not the racism was a totally different issue. So having said that, how does Boston reconcile itself? Well, isn't that the question of Boston? I mean, I think that's the question of Boston, which is why busing is, this book did stem from a conversation I had a long time ago. I don't know, normally name drop, but there's no other way to say it. When we were making Gone Baby Gone, Ben Affleck and I had a conversation about sooner or later, somebody has to tell the story of busing, because you can't understand Boston if you don't understand busing. And so ultimately that was ringing in my head as I wrote it. This is the story of Boston as I understand Boston. Is Boston changing? Well, yeah, it is, but there's still pockets. My favorite part of Boston is Charlestown, and I lived there until I left Boston 10 years ago. And I remember my wife at the time saying, we'd just seen the town, and she said, the way you talk about it, the way you see it in the town, the way it's Mystic River was kind of inspired by Charlestown. It seems like a rough place, but all I see are yuppies like us driving BMWs, and I'm like, just wait. You know what I mean? Just wait. And like 2 days later, we were at the playground, and there was a woman there, and she was such a townie. I mean, the hair that's had so many dye jobs, it doesn't remember what it was originally, and she's wearing like, the Kmart sweatshirt with the American flag on it, and she's smoking a Benson Hedges Deluxe Ultralight the size of a Scud missile, and she's got 3 kids and 3 different fathers, and they're all playing around, and they're playing around my daughter, who at that time was less than 2. She was just, no, she was 1. She was a toddler. And there's these 3 little kids just running around her. And she's talking to us. She's like, where are you from? My wife doesn't understand a word she's saying, right? She's like, where's you from? You guys townies or toonies? You know, it's doing the whole thing, you know. And then all of a sudden, she reaches out. She grabs one of her kids who's been buzzing around my daughter in this little car. And she says, you're scaring the little girl. You're scaring the little girl. If I have to tell you again, I'm taking you back to the playground and the projects. We'll see how you like it if you get shot.
Wow. Oh.
And my wife, who was like from upstate New York, was like, so we're going to go. And the woman's like, God bless. And I'm like, that's the Boston that still exists. But yes, I think for the most part, there is hope. And but I think the attitudes are just going out of the city. They're going someplace else. The attitudes are not going away. They're going someplace else.
Yeah.
People are not dealing with this by saying, we're going to learn to change our 50-year, 40-year, 30-year calcified attitudes on race. It's the city's a cesspool. Let's move to the suburbs and take these attitudes with us.
Yeah.
And to the voting booth, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not exactly the most hopeful person in the world when it comes to where we're going as a country or a world.
You know, just one thing, Dennis, you know, and I don't know much, like one of the kind of dichotomies, I guess, I don't know whether that's the right term to use, about the Irish in all of this is like they're all over the place. So I don't know much about Garrity, but presumably he's Irish, Worcester, Irish background, and I guess he's vaguely, I don't know the politics of it, he was, you know, kind of on the right side in terms of, you know, in general, I guess what he was trying to do. And that, you know, that kind of way, like you know, I think about my personal story. My father's family had immigrated from Jamaica and ended up in Boston in 1965. And his brothers are getting the crap kicked out of them by Irish American kids in the school, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But it's an Irish priest who, you know, kind of supports the family and encourages them to move to New York. You know, this kind of, they're on both sides at times in terms of what's going on. Sorry, I just kind of wanted to mention that, and you. I guess you just wanted to set the historical context of it with that opening note at the start in terms of what was going on.
Yeah. So Garrity had been trying to find a resolution to this for quite some time. And he had been trying to work with the Boston School Committee, which was stocked with racists from South Boston. There's no other way to put it. They went out of their way. Louis Day Hicks is the most famous person. So the Boston School Committee did every single thing they could to block a desegregation order that went back to 1965 or 65. It was 65. So since 1965, the Boston Public Schools were supposed to desegregate, and the Boston School Committee blocked it at every step that they could. So Garrity was finally left with this dropped in his lap, and within 2 months before he delivered his decision, the suburbs, in a federal lawsuit, pulled out. So he thought he was going to be doing something that was county-wide. It was going to affect Suffolk County. It was going to affect Middlesex County. And man, I think that would have been great. I do believe that was paradise lost. I do believe that, because none of these issues could have come up. If everybody was involved, then everybody's involved.
Yeah.
At the last minute, here he is, less than 60 days to his decision, told it will only affect the inner city. That's it. The poor neighborhoods. That's it. Nobody else. So there's Garrity stuck. And he's been trying to come to a resolution for over 2 years. He's been blocked at every step. And finally, he just says, all right, what's this busing plan? And he implements it with 90 days to go. And he doesn't like it. And he knows it's crap, but it's the law. And he's just enforcing the law. He ends up being demonized. I mean, he was, you know, I mean, you just couldn't say a worse word in most Irish households that I knew than Garrity. And I think at one point his children were threatened. I mean, it was ugly as sin. When he died, they asked for a comment from Ray Flint, who'd been mayor of Boston, who'd also been in this, tip of the spear in the anti-busing movement. I'm not saying Ray was a racist. I'm saying he was very anti-busing. He's been on record about that. And Ray said, "I'm glad he's dead. He destroyed my neighborhood."
Wow.
That's in this century that he said that. So
Wow.
that's how inflamed all of that got. And that's how inflamed it all remains. So
And
Garrity
yet,
was.
and yet, to speak to the question before, no one is willing to discuss what desegregation of schools never could have fundamentally achieved, which is desegregation of neighborhoods. And so at the same time as they're trying to force busing, there's struggles to unsuccessful ultimately to make it possible for people of color to buy homes in neighborhoods all around the city. My parents were very active in work to make fair housing legislation a reality where we lived, and they faced death threats for doing so.
Right.
This is out in those suburbs. And, it's sort of the bus. I agree with the critique of the policy busing, because busing could never achieve what ultimately they said it was for, which was to afford children an equal opportunity to education. I mean, it could never have done it unless they did lots of other things to make economic parity possible.
Yes,
they used to do.
Yeah, no, I agree. I chose where my children go to school here. I remember choosing it based on and sitting there and talking to people and saying, okay, I get it. You have racial parity, but do you have economic? I mean, are these kids from various? So I don't care if my kid goes to school with Will Smith's kid. That's not going to help. It's like, I want my kids going to school with kids whose parents are truck drivers and whose parents are, I want everything. And I found the right school, and it took me a long time, but that was what I was after. It's not as simple as just the Rainbow Coalition, let everybody be a different color. No, there has to be a sense of, my friends live this way. I live this way. I'm aware of this, and my daughters are thank God, at least they're very aware of how blessed they are, and that they didn't have a damn thing to do about it with it. I like to remind them of, this is not your house, my house. You know what I mean? Your father built it, it's your father's success that got us here, not you. But yeah, no, I think it's very important for, I'll tell you the one thing I would do if I was, this is the one thing I would say, I have no desire for power, but if I were king for a day, one thing I would institute and rip it out so that it could never be touched again and that there'd be no exceptions would be a draft. Every single human being at the age of 18 would have to either serve in the armed forces, the civil forces, something. And you would have to give a year of your life to your country. And you would have to do it with every single different type of race and and you would have to do it, period. No way out, no deferments, no anything. And if we did that, then we're truly a democracy, in my opinion.
And we might be more reluctant to go to war.
We'd be way more reluctant to go to war. I'm not a bumper sticker guy, but a bumper sticker I love is, you like war, send your kids.
Exactly.
Dennis, we've some lovely comments coming in, and I'm conscious of time. I know it's on the 2:00 mark on the East Coast, and we've taken a lot of your morning. You've been very generous. Just one last quick question, Dennis. Someone had asked if you'd seen the recent PBS special about the Boston busing conflicts, and what did you think of it? Did you see that?
Oh no, I didn't even know they did one. Why wasn't I consulted? I didn't know. No, I didn't know they did one. I think right now I'm kind of busting out. I'm a little over the subject matter for a little bit, and then I got to up to turn it into, I'm going to be turning it into a limited TV show soon.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, I wanted, one of the things that I couldn't do in the book, it would have derailed the book. I tried, I wanted to tell the other story. I wanted to tell what Calliope was going through, what her and her husband were going through, the Augie Williamson side of the story, but there was no propulsive storyline on that side of the spectrum that would balance against the propulsive storyline of Mary Pat. And so it would have just collapsed the book. So I didn't do it. But now if I have the freedom to roam in a television show, I'm going to get to really dive into that.
That would be great.
Yeah, that'll be so amazing. One last question, for me, Dennis,
Guys,
if you don't
so
mind.
I'm okay for time if you want to throw.
Okay. Yeah.
Fine.
No. I we'll wrap up there now because I know people. I know Zoom is long, but this is a great conversation. Can I ask you, Dennis, what's your what's your best kind of a writing day? Like, how do you, for novels? Do you get up early in the morning? Do you need to be in a office on your own for hours on end? Like, what's your best kind of?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons I don't like writing novels as much anymore. It takes so much, it demands so much from me. To write a novel, usually I have to get up, I have to get to my desk with almost no contact with anybody else. I have to stay in the dream world. You come out of a dream world, I want my head still kind of there. Then I write. If I can get in 1 hour that way, if I can get in 2 hours that way, then I'm great. But it demands focus, crazy level of focus. And if somebody comes in and breaks that focus, or if I have to drive a kid to school, if I have to do anything, then it's gone. My workday's gone. Mm-hmm. I can write a script on the 50-yard line of the Super Bowl. I don't need anything to focus on a script. I just need a pen or a laptop, because I don't have to become the character when I write a book. I mean, when I write a script. I do when I write a book. I have to become the person. I have to go all the way into their head. And the other thing is I find description very difficult, in the sense of, to describe something while making the action move forward takes a lot from me. It really does. I find it extremely difficult. In a script, it's interior, kitchen, day. Move on. You don't have to describe anything, So that my perfect day now, is really all over the map, because I'm I'm writing this TV show set in Dublin. I'm writing, and I work on that at all different times. And I've been doing this to the point now where I do feel like I put in my 10,000 hours. I do know how to do this at a very instinctual way. Mm-hmm. But books are tough, man. Books are hard. Really
I saw you're a big fan of Claire Keegan's work.
I adore Claire Keegan's work. Yes. Here's one of my favorite things about my job. I adore this. I read Claire Keegan. I fall in love with her writing. I'm just like, oh my God, these are two of the finest short novels I've ever read. Then I read all her short stories. Just blown away. I get to then reach out to somebody I know in publishing to get Claire Keegan's email. And then I email and I tell her how much I love her work. And that's one of my favorite side effects of this job, is that we just get to reach out to each other and be like, hey, I read your thing. I loved it. I was at the Killers of the Flower Moon premiere the other day, and David Gran was there. David and I, have crossed paths and have this mutual admiration society of two for each other's work. I think he's a generational talent as a nonfiction writer. And we were just so happy. Like, it was like, we're just happy, wow, we get to do this and we get paid. It's pretty cool.
That's how I got you. I'll name check. Colin McCann very kindly reached out to you on my behalf when we were trying to reach out to you. He was very good. You may or may not answer this last question. I'm sorry. I know we're going over on time, but it's really enjoyable. Did you send Small Mercies to Ben Affleck, and did he like it, or did you follow up?
No, I don't do stuff like that. No.
Okay.
Small Mercies is mine. it was never ever going to be sold to anybody except a studio in which I was handling everything. I'm the show. I want to run this thing top to bottom. This is mine. And even all the scripts, I've already told my team of writers who I work with on other shows, and I'm working on with my next show. You guys want to be in the room? Fine, but you're not touching a line of the scripts.
Yes.
This is my baby all the way. So,
Yes.
and everybody's like, great. So,
well, keep doing it. I mean, genuinely, I don't get a lot of time to read fiction, Dennis. I'm reading for work stuff, and I have 2 kids, and it's a busy lifestyle. But this is such a pleasurable, dark read, but just such a joy. So easy to. I just brought us right in, and I'm so excited to hear that it will come to a small screen, I guess, at some point in the future.
Yep. Great.
I also want to say thank you for making me homesick in both senses of the term. Like,
yeah. There you go.
Your work just captures so much of what it was like, what it felt like. And I so appreciate that, because I love Boston as much as, I need to leave after 2 days.
Yeah, I am a homer through and through. I just that's just my home. It'll never end.
Yeah.
Dennis, thank you so much. You've been so generous with your time.
Of course, thank you guys.
This has been such a pleasure to share with our audience, and with your permission, we'll archive it alongside the other interviews we've conducted. And I'll just remind people that on November 1st, we'll be returning with Rachel Swarns, who's written a fabulous history of, the book is called 272, about enslaved people who were associated with Georgetown University and the Jesuit role in terms of enslavement and things like that. Another kind of tough subject, but very well written. Yeah. Rachel's after getting accolades and awards already, so we're really looking forward to that, and a nice follow-on from what we've covered today with Dennis. Thanks again, Dennis, and I hope we get an opportunity to cross paths with you again and keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you guys so much. Have a great one.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.